Somewhere along the way, I think we started mistaking emotional shutting down for emotional strength. And we started calling it maturity when someone could take a hit or someone could keep a straight face and then keep moving as if nothing had happened. And I think we began to admire the men who never flinched, who never wavered, who never showed what was going on the inside. And without realizing it, I think we began to really starve ourselves of the very thing that makes us human, and that's the ability to feel. Now, I've seen this have happen to young men in particular, and it's often by accident, and at times it's also by design. The message starts very early, and that's be tough. Don't cry, don't overreact, don't make it about your feelings. And it's usually framed as guidance for how to become a man, for being dependable, for staying composed under pressure. But what's really being taught, though, I think, is that emotions are a problem to be suppressed and not this part of yourself that needs to be understood. And the cost is steep because over time, this form of maturity creates distance in relationships. It makes intimacy far harder because vulnerability feels like weakness. And it erodes self-awareness because you stop paying attention to what you're actually feeling. And it builds this wall inside of you, not just to keep the pain out, but also basically to keep everything out. You see, true maturity isn't about sealing yourself off from what hurts. It's more about having the capacity to feel without losing your footing. It's knowing how to navigate anger without being consumed by it, or how to navigate grief without being drowned by it, or how to have joy without being reckless with it. See, real maturity doesn't demand that you be a stone. It asks that you be steady, and steady is different from numbness. See, I've met men who believe that they were handling life like really well because nothing got to them anymore. They could take insults without flinching. They could take bad news without fear, right? They could take heartbreak without showing any hint of pain. But when we dig deeper, though, what they were calling handling was actually just shutting down. They had disconnected from their own inner world because that felt far safer than risking being seen as fragile. And here's the hard truth, I would say. The more one numbs themselves, the more they're starving from the relationships that are around them. Intimacy, it doesn't grow in an emotional vacuum. And trust doesn't deepen when people feel like they're talking to a wall. And while you might be avoiding the discomfort of feeling vulnerable, you're also avoiding the joy of being fully known. In my work here at Uber Vintagers, I talk with young men about the courage that it takes to reverse this process. It's not easy to start feeling again when you've spent years training yourself not to feel. It can feel awkward, even threatening to admit something actually got under your skin. But the alternative is to keep living at half volume when you're present physically, but you're absent emotionally. There's this temptation to justify this emotional absence by pointing to the benefits, right? You're less reactive, right? You don't make impulsive decisions. You can actually keep working through the chaos without falling apart. And yes, there is value to being able to regulate your emotions, but regulation is not really the same as elimination. See, the danger is that when you eliminate emotions entirely, you're also eliminating the ability to connect and to empathize and to be moved toward action or by what really matters most. And it's this false maturity, this emotional starvation, if you will, that often begins as a survival strategy. If you, for example, grew up in a home where feelings were dismissed, right, or mocked, or punished, then I think you've learned to keep them hidden. if you've spent years in these environments where showing emotion could be used against you, you've in essence learned to armor up then, right? But what worked to protect you then will slowly start to suffocate you now, especially if you never learn another way to live. And this is the turning point, I think. If you don't have, like, if you have to choose between maturity and emotion, oof. Real maturity, I think, requires emotion. It requires the self-awareness to recognize that what you're feeling, there's a wisdom in how to express it in a way that's honest, but not destructive. And a strength to let others see you in your humanity and not just as unshakable. One of the most common misunderstandings I would say about emotional maturity is this belief that the less you feel, the stronger you are. This isn't strength though, it's narrowing of oneself. Well, when you train yourself not to feel, you're losing access not only to the pain, but also to the joy and compassion and the kind of motivation that comes from being deeply moved and known. I've watched men cut themselves off from grief, only to find that they also struggle to feel happiness. And they mute their frustration to avoid conflict. But in the process, they're also muting their passion for the things that they really care about. And they pride themselves on staying calm in every situation, but they can't remember the last time when they felt alive, like truly alive. And what they don't see is that emotional numbness is not a sign of control. It's a sign of disconnection. Control says, I can experience this without being ruled by it. And disconnection says, I refuse to experience this at all. They may look similar from the outside, but one will lead to growth, while the other one leads to stagnation. And the danger is that our culture often rewards the disconnected version. We give promotions to people who never let stress show. And we admire leaders who keep a cool head, right? No matter what. We call someone level-headed when they don't let emotions color their decisions. And yes, composure does have value. I agree. But only when it's anchored in connection, not in absence. There's a difference between staying grounded and going cold. Groundedness comes from having deep roots, knowing who you are and what you value, and how to navigate these difficult moments without losing your center. Whereas coldness is just shutting the door down on anything that could move you. One will build resilience, and the other one will create this kind of a prison that you're building for yourself. When I work with young men, I often want to start by asking them to notice the small signals in their bodies. Is there tension in the shoulders, perhaps? Is there a knot in the stomach? Do you have a racing pulse? These are, I think, the body's way of saying something matters here. And if you're ignoring these signals for long enough, they stop knocking. And when they stop knocking, you start missing the cues that help you engage with life meaningfully. There's a paradox here. See, to truly handle it in a way that's mature, you actually have to be willing to feel it in the first place. Maturity is not avoiding the storm. Maturity is knowing how to walk through that storm without getting swept away. And that means you're letting the wind hit your face, letting the rain soak your clothes, and you're still keeping your eyes on where you're headed. And the problem is, especially with numbing, is that it doesn't really turn down the volume on the pain. It just turns down the volume on everything. And so you can't really selectively numb. When you shut out sadness, you're dimming joy. When you refuse to feel fear, you're blunting your sense of excitement. The emotional palette will narrow until life becomes flat and muted in your experience. And yet so many men cling to numbness because it feels safer. If nothing gets in, nothing can hurt you, right? But the truth is, nothing can heal you either in that zone. The very walls that keep out the bad also are keeping out the good. And over time, you become this observer of your own life rather than an actual participant within it. Real maturity is about expanding your capacity to hold both the light and the dark, the comfort and the discomfort. It's really about letting yourself feel enough to be moved, but not so much that you're always swept away. It's not a perfect balance. It's a practice, a skill that develops over time, that's built on trust in yourself and in the relationships where you can actually be fully seen. And for many men, this habit of numbing begins so early that they have challenges remembering a time when it wasn't their default. Maybe they were told directly or indirectly that crying was unacceptable. Perhaps they learned that expressing disappointment or fear would only lead to being ridiculed. Or maybe they simply never saw another man in their life who was modeling a healthy way of handling emotions. And so they assumed that the only option was to lock it down. Now, this conditioning, it often gets reinforced in adulthood. A man who holds back tears at a funeral, for example, he's praised for being strong, right? A man who doesn't flinch when he's criticized at work is admired for his thick skin. Or a man who can end a relationship without showing sadness is seen as in control. And in each case here, the reinforcement pushes him further toward this idea that his worth is tied to his ability to remain untouched. But here's the cost though. Numbness erodes authenticity. You can't build real intimacy with others if you're constantly hiding this part of yourself, especially the part that feels. People may trust you to be dependable, but they won't feel truly connected to you. And over time, this lack of connection will create a quiet loneliness that no amount of composure can ever protect you from. At Uber Vintagers, I've observed young men who are wrestling with loneliness in ways that surprise them. And so when I interact with them, their challenge is more about managing stress or building confidence or becoming more assertive. But the more we talk, it becomes more clear that what's really missing is the ability to show up emotionally in a present way, to let someone see what's happening on the inside without fearing losing their dignity. See, the journey back from emotional starvation is rarely a dramatic overnight shift. More often than not, it begins with these small moments of honesty. Admitting, for example, to a friend that really bothered me when you said that. Or telling a partner, I'm feeling overwhelmed in this moment right now. Or even saying to yourself, for example, I'm disappointed and it's okay for me to feel disappointed. These are not signs of weakness. These are actually acts of reclaiming your emotional life. One practical starting point is creating safe spaces where you can actually practice feeling without any judgment. Now, this might mean therapy. It might mean a trusted friendship. It might mean a quiet moment with a journal where you put words to the emotions that you've been ignoring for some time. The important thing is to give yourself permission to notice and then to name what's happening inside before you actually decide how you want to respond to it. The goal here isn't to become someone who is ruled by feelings. I would say that's fear. That's the fear that many men have. That if they open their door to emotions, it's going to flood the room and they'll lose control. But that's not how it works. In fact, the more you practice feeling and naming your emotions, the more skilled you become at actually managing your emotions. It's kind of like learning how to swim, right? The answer to not drowning isn't to avoid the water forever. It's to get comfortable enough in the water that you can move through it with confidence. Now, I think another important piece of this learning, especially how to communicate uh, in the emotional realm, is to build trust instead of fear. When you share honestly, it's not about dumping raw feelings on someone else just to make them carry the weight for you. It's about inviting them into your reality so that they can understand you more fully. That's how intimacy grows. And when intimacy grows, so does that sense of safety that really allows you to keep showing up as your whole self. I think we often underestimate how much courage it takes to live this way, especially in a culture that equates manhood with stoicism. Choosing to feel is this quiet act of rebellion. Choosing to share is a declaration, if you will, that you will not let fear or old programming dictate the terms of your humanity. The irony of emotional starvation, though, is that it's often done in the name of love and responsibility, right? Us men, we convince ourselves that shutting down, especially our feelings, will protect us and the people that we care about. And we think that if we don't show how much pain we're in, then they won't have to carry it. If they believe that I can keep the fear to myself, I won't shake their confidence in me, right? That's how we usually say it. But when you cut yourself off in this way, you're not actually protecting anyone. You're withholding the part of yourself that allows others to truly know who you are. And without that, relationships will become more of a performance instead of the partnership that could be. You might be physically present, yes, but emotionally you're somewhere else entirely. And the people who actually care about you, they don't need you to be unshakable. They need you to be honest. They need to know not just what you're thinking, but also what you're feeling. And they need to know that you trust them enough to share your inner world, even the messy parts. And that's where real connection begins to grow. It's breaking the habit of numbing. And this isn't really about swinging to like the opposite extreme and expressing every feeling in real time without any filter. It's more about finding that middle ground where your emotions can exist without running the show. And that balance takes time to develop. And it's okay if you are stumbling along the way. Every step you're taking toward being more emotionally present is a step towards your fuller, more richer life, or what could be. The truth is, you can't truly handle it if your method of handling it is to shut down. That's not maturity, that's withdrawal. Real maturity looks like showing up in the storm and feeling the wind and the rain and still steering that ship with steady hands. It's not about keeping the storm from touching you, it's about not letting that storm sink you. And this kind of maturity has this ripple effect, if you will. When you show up with both steadiness and feelings, you're actually giving others permission to do the same as well. And you create this culture in your home, in your friendships, in your workplace, where emotional presence is valued and not feared. And that culture, it strengthens everyone inside of it, right? See, I've seen men who have transformed their lives simply by allowing themselves to be human again. And they discover that vulnerability does not make them weaker. It actually makes them stronger, because vulnerability roots their relationships in something tangible and real. And they find that they can still be dependable without being disconnected. And further, they learn that the very feelings that they try to avoid were often keys, if you will, to deeper connection and purpose and fulfillment. So my dear listener, if you've been living in this emotional starvation zone, you don't have to keep going that way. Start small. Notice what you're feeling, especially in moments of stress. Write it down. or share it with someone that you trust. Let yourself be known. Because over time, you're going to find that you can still handle these life changes without numbing yourself to the beauty that is in life around us. Because in the end, maturity, it was never about flinching. It was about being fully alive and still choosing to act with integrity and intimacy. And it's about keeping your heart open enough to feel and having your mind clear enough to lead the way. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. And that's the kind of strength I think that the world actually needs from you and from me. Let me know how this episode landed for you all. Thanks for watching it all the way to this point. I'll see you in the next episode.